Sound speeds. And if you've ever ventured into a sound-related internet forum or watched any YouTube sound-related content, then you might have heard the term cutting through the mix related to something like editing your motion picture video or even your music. But what in the world does it mean? Well, in this video, we're going to discuss it and maybe even some of the basics. Since there aren't any sounds in this recording environment keeping you from hearing my voice, I can record with a flat microphone. And if I do any boosting at all, it's because I basically want to make myself sound different. Like maybe give myself a deep voice, which you guys know I don't have. But the world is a noisy place, and not everywhere you shoot is a recording studio. So if you do any kind of location shooting out in the field, then you might consider getting yourself some sort of a microphone that can help boost your vocals where you need a little help. How do you know where you need this help? Well, in another one of my videos called Harmonics, Overtones, and the Human Voice, I go into something called the fundamental vocal frequency. And that is the lowest frequency that kind of defines your voice, so to speak. And that frequency right there does have harmonics and overtones that play into what you hear. And that fundamental vocal frequency right there is something you can play with, especially if you need a little bit of help. Before I get into that, let me discuss A weighting. A weighting is the way that the human ear hears sounds at low volumes, and B and C weighting would be medium and high volumes. But if I say that I can hear between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz, I'm not hearing all of them at the same volume. There are some more towards the middle that my ear is naturally going to pull in better than the ones on the extremes. And as I start to age, I start to lose some of the highs. And at the time of this video, I'm in my 40s, so you can imagine I'm starting to lose some of my highs. Unfortunately, my ears may not be able to pick up 20,000 hertz, 19,000 hertz, 18,000 hertz, but whatever that cutoff frequency is, it doesn't just go to that frequency and then drop off to the face of the earth. No, it actually starts to roll off. And because it rolls off, I might have to turn up the volume a little bit to hear those frequencies, but I should be able to hear them. It's just not that sensitive to those frequencies anymore, and eventually I will lose them. Now think about this. The microphone you use has to be tuned to work well with the voice or sound that you're recording. So, for example, if I have no real natural low frequencies in my voice, like I don't, then I may choose to use a microphone that is considered darker, that has more lower frequencies in it. But if I have a very deep voice and I'm kind of more muffly maybe, let's say, I might want something that is brighter to help bring out more sibilance in my voice. Microphones are designed to sound a certain way, and you can't tell from the specifications exactly how that's going to sound in your ears. You can't tell if it's very crisp and clear, if it has a good degree of clarity, or if it's more muffled, for example. You have to hear that microphone with a voice. And even if the manufacturers did want to recommend it for deeper voices, they're not going to tell you that because they'd rather you listen and make that determination for yourself. So for example, I'm doing a location shoot and I have two actors speaking in front of a waterfall. So I need to choose a microphone that is going to help me extract that dialogue out of the background noise, which is the waterfall. That's not an easy task. It could be the way that the microphone sounds, yes, but it could be something like microphone polar pattern that could help me do that. Every decent brand microphone has been engineered to have a certain sound. So if a microphone happens to pick up certain frequencies better than others, it could be to give a more open feel, or to help with clarity and sharpness of a voice, or maybe to help overcome a lisp. And it's important to note that these engineers that designed the microphone designed it with that sound in mind from one axis. You can't talk into the backside of a microphone and expect it to sound the same as it would from the front. And that's because coloration basically comes in the front lobe, where it's going to pick up the maximum frequencies. One reason a microphone may have a boosted higher frequency is because of the commercial or infomercial factor. Let me explain. Have you ever watched a movie and everything sounds great, and then all of a sudden a commercial comes on and not only is it louder, but the vocals are just very sharp and you can't ignore them? It makes you kind of have to listen. That's because it is a boosted higher frequency that your brain naturally dials in on and you hear sharper. That's it. Sharper, higher voices command your attention. It's biological. Women even hear those frequencies better than us men do. But I will add this. Science plays into what you can hear. Higher frequencies carry better than lows. The lower frequencies happen to dissipate over distance a lot quicker than the highs. So higher frequencies helps you to hear a longer distance. And that's one reason why microphone manufacturers may also do it. That's why it's important for you to edit the proper way. Sure, if you're editing YouTube videos, feel free to get yourself a pair of flat headphones or maybe even not flat headphones and go for it. But headphones lie, which is why you're not going to find a lot of mixers of movies or music using headphones in their mixing studios. No, they're going to be using monitor speakers that are calibrated to be relatively flat at a volume of around 85 to 87 dB. And that volume is set according to the mixer's preference, which is usually dictated by the size of the room that the mixer is mixing in. Oh, and a side note about headphones. Don't have the volume up too loud. It's going to deafen you over time. And if you have a microphone in front of you, you could actually be bleeding or rather leaking sound through them and causing feedback into your microphone. What I usually do to set my headphone volume level is I listen to someone's voice at maybe 4 or 5 feet away, and I try to set my audio level to hear that person at the same volume through my microphone. Now, to better discuss the way that your voice can be edited to cut through a mix, let's jump over to the computer. Before we get going, let me point out a few things. Because a modern industrialized society, we usually have a tendency of losing our hearing earlier than we did in generations past. We as a people used to simply go to work in a quieter environment than we did now. Now, that's not always the case. I mean, in mining and, other conditions that were not OSHA regulated, people would lose their hearing by the time they were in their late 20s. And that doesn't necessarily happen now unless you don't use proper hearing protection and you do something like FOH house mixing. Now we have medical terms like the word presbycusis, which means age-related hearing loss. And that corresponds to how we normally hear around 20,000 hertz at about the age of 20. And we start to lose that, go down to 19, 18, 17K, down to 16, 15, 14, 13 as we start to get older and older. And that frequency range naturally diminishes because of all the noises that we hear. Now, there are reports that state that in lesser industrialized countries and places that people don't have access to machines and industry that makes things very, very loud, hearing does not diminish the same way as it does in industrialized countries. In addition to it being a good idea to flatten the frequency response of the monitor speakers you're using something like Sonarworks, it's also a good idea for you to get your ears checked regularly. And if you don't want to do that, then you might as well go online and find yourself a tone generation website and really see what your range is that you can hear. And this comes into play if you are doing with any kind of editing of maybe, let's say, frequencies that you can't hear. A few years ago, I was working on a TV show, and no, I'm not going to name it, but the post-sound editors were very experienced. That's another way of saying they were old and had lost some of their higher frequency range. And we didn't realize it until we were watching the show and we were hearing some of the HMI ballast ringing in our ears. And we were kind of surprised to hear that in the tracks on the show. Came to find out that they were being pushed to go fast and to just get the tracks edited and put out there because they were under a deadline. And they didn't have a chance to roll off the upper frequencies, and they didn't hear it. So guess what went out over the air? After we mentioned this, they started running a process on it and even went back after the fact, as I understand it, and corrected it so it wouldn't affect anything that they re-aired. But still, a couple more things to consider if you're editing is to feel your ears constantly. And I don't mean like actually feel them, I mean feel the pressure that's coming into your ears. Some of the higher frequencies that you can't hear, you will still feel your ears struggling, and maybe you feel pressure in them that you're not sure where that's coming from, and you might even start to develop a headache simply because of something that's there. Look at it on a waveform, and you're probably going to see something there that you're not that pleased with. Now, another thing to keep in mind is something called sensory gating, and I have a whole video dedicated to that. But it basically corresponds with your brain's ability to filter out sounds that you don't find to be important. So if you're not listening for something, you might not actually hear it. Therefore, you need to train your ears to unhear, or rather unblock, the things that you normally are trying to block. If you look online, you'll find a bunch of EQ cheat sheets for everything from guitars and snare drums to your vocals. And I personally love the way this one is laid out. And this is the website it used to be on, but that website is no longer in existence. But still, credit to the creator. Now, the reason I like the layout of this one probably the best of any of the ones I've found online is because it goes into things like clarity. The reason why clarity is so important in this frequency range for males and females is because those are the fundamental vocal frequencies. If you want to know what that is, watch that video right there. However, I will point out this. Basically, across the board, there are ranges of frequencies that you can boost or cut according to what you are hearing and want to boost, emphasize, or de-emphasize. The reason it is a frequency range is because if you have a deeper voice, you're going to need to boost or cut different frequencies than you would if you had a higher pitch voice. For example, if you want to add warmth to a deeper voice, it's going to be closer to 100 hertz than it would be if you had a higher pitch voice and you want to boost closer to 150. Now let's go through this chart, starting with below the fundamental vocal frequencies that typically exist on a human voice, which is below about 80 hertz. Anything below about 80 hertz you can start to roll off, but remember the way that roll off works. Look at the video right there if you have any questions. And think about this. If you start cutting those frequencies, there's better be a reason for it. You don't want to just cut it for the simple sake of doing it. If you're not using a shock mount on your microphone, it could very well pick up low rumbles that you want to get rid of. If there's definite frequencies like an air conditioning system you can't cut off, then by all means roll those off. But if you don't have to, you might consider leaving it simply because it doesn't hurt anything to leave that fullness in the frequency range that you're listening to. Now listen to me very closely for a second. When EQing, do it very intentionally and sparingly. Only as needed. Let me explain why. If you're looking at the fundamental vocal frequency of the human voice, that typically falls within this 100 to 150 hertz range. And if you start boosting or cutting that, you're going to be drastically changing your sound. Let me explain. Right here, if you add warmth and fullness by boosting it, you are actually going to be increasing boominess and small room resonance. But if you cut it, you're removing boominess and small room resonance while removing warmth and fullness from your vocals. Now, let's look at a different frequency range, 800 hertz to 1K. If you boost it, you're creating more clarity. But if you cut it, you're going to be removing a more nasally tone. Now, the same kind of thing happens if you look at the 3 to 6K realm. This is presence, which most microphones boost presence, but that opens up the vocals. But at the same time, if you have any kind of digital harshness from recording in a less than ideal recording situation, or or maybe lower quality than you really wanted to, there could be some harshness there that's going to be emphasized if you boost it. So you might need to cut it there, but then that removes the presence out of your voice. Also, look at the sibilance. It starts around 4K, which is definitely within that presence range as well. And if you start to boost that, you're going to be increasing the hissiness that comes with your voice. On that note, some people I've seen online look at something like a de-esser and consider that for if you happen to have a lisp. You heard me tease it earlier. I'll tell you this. A lisp is actually not going to be helped with a de-esser because a de-esser rather, removes the hard S sound and creates almost a lisp if you don't set it right. So a hiss could be turned into a hith, and that's not going to be helpful if you have a lisp. So you need to actually boost presence in order to overcome a lispy sound. But I would also say if you happen to have a lisp in your voice, embrace it, work it. Make it yours. But let's move on. If you have a 9 to 11K boost, that's going to give you a brightness feel, and anything over 12K is air. But if you start to basically cut it, look right there, less brittle. Everything is a trade-off. You boost one thing, you're going to be cutting another. And keep in mind that you could cut your fundamental vocal frequencies, but the overtones and harmonics boost them and play with them in such a way just the way microphone manufacturers do with their boosts and cuts of certain frequencies, and you could actually come out with a very good product with your human voice in your recording environment. So now that I've spoken about 13 and a half minutes on what you might consider to be a tangent, why don't I actually tell you what cutting through the mix is? Cutting through the mix is boosting or cutting certain frequencies to help you hear your vocals over your music or over your background sound in your movie. Rolling off frequencies below 100 hertz or using a parametric equalizer to help cut some of your fundamental vocal frequencies can also help your voice stick out over your mix because there's a lot of prevalent sound effects and musical instruments that reside in that frequency range. And if your vocals are in there too, it's going to muddy it up. So by removing it, you can hear the musical instruments better and you can also hear your voice better. Or how how about this? Boost a little bit between 800 Hz and 1K to add a little bit of clarity to help cut through the mix. Or maybe add a little bit between 3 and 5K to help add presence and cut through the mix. But it's not just EQ that helps cut through the mix, compression does as well. By eliminating your dynamic range, or at least reducing it, you're going to bring up your audio level so that way they're always going to be a consistent, louder audio level, and that's going to help cut through your mix. So keep all this in mind, because all of that is sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.